Well, so Jackie is kind of a confidence expert by now. I know she probably doesn't like the word expert, but she helps PhD candidates, and do you call them just PhDs, I guess. Once they're
PhDs.
when they're not a candidate, they're a PhD. So once they have their PhD, um, Jackie helps them, and she's going to do a much better job of explaining this. But essentially, they're at a crossroads. They have to figure out what they want to do with their career, essentially. Do I want to go into industry? Do I want to continue to do research? Am I even qualified to go into industry after I've done all of this research? So she has a ton of experience in working with individuals who have sort of had to make a jump into something new. And she's going to talk about confidence in entrepreneurship today. And because it's a little bit of a roller coaster. So Jackie, go ahead and take it away. I'm really excited about this one. I've known Jackie longer than most of you, so this one's is special to me. So take it away, Jackie.
All right. Oh, can I share my screen? Can you make me a
Yes,
host or
I
something?
can.
Thanks.
All right, try now.
Okay. Yes. Okay, awesome. Thank you. All the windows. Sorry, this is my fault for having all the tabs open. Okay, can you see my slides now?
Yes, we can.
Awesome. Okay. Oh, wait, hang on. Where's the button to? Hang on. I'm sorry. I made a mistake. I think I had to make it full screen before I shared it, and my apologies. I haven't done this in a little bit.
No problem.
We were going to muddle through, and it'll be okay.
Oh, we'll edit out all the fun parts.
No, but this is part of the part of the process. See, part of it is that, when your confidence is really terrible, you get super flustered about stuff like this, and it freaks you out, and then you're off your game. It's just part of life. See, I'm living my truth here. So, all right, let's try this again. Take two. Now, can you see my slides still?
Yes.
Cool. All right. Thank you for your patience while I am dealing with tech issues. So yeah, my name is Jackie, and I do help people with confidence, and I am a little uncomfortable being called an expert, but I think that's true for a lot of us. And some of that is because I'm a reformed academic. And when you think about experts in that context, it's the people who've put in, decades of research and all the time, and they know everything about this one teeny tiny little idea and nothing about everything else in the world. That's always been my definition of an expert growing up. So I'm learning to unlearn that. That's my issue, not yours. Anyway, so today we're here to talk about confidence in entrepreneurship, specifically how to overcome things like imposter syndrome and self-doubt. So I think this is something that we all struggle with in some form or another. So I want to start with posing a question to you, and I'm inviting you to consider what confidence means to you, because I think we all have this sense that confidence is important. It matters, it affects things. In fact, if you think about it, it affects everything. It affects how we show up, whether or not we go after opportunities, how we interact with one another, all of these things. But I think a lot of us haven't really thought about what that means. Like, what does that actually look like to be confident? And this is a fairly personal thing. I think it's going to look a little bit different for each of us because we each have different values and things that matter to us. But, I would invite you to consider right now, what does confidence actually mean to you specifically? I know that it took me a long time to figure that answer out. Like, I struggled with this for a while, and it was a long, tough process to get from where I was then to where I am now. But I do have an idea now about what confidence means to me, and I'll share that with you in a little bit. But first, I do want to share a little bit about my journey, about how I got to this point, because figuring out what confidence meant and how to embody that was a really hard lesson to learn. So this is brand new Dr. Jackie when she graduated from grad school, and that's my mentor. By the way, I'm not tall, she's tiny, so don't let the proportions fool you. I'm not a giant. But I do feel very tall in that photo. Anyway, so at this point in my life, I just got my PhD, and what I knew at that point was I did not want to do research. And that's all I knew. I didn't know what I wanted to do with my career. I was floundering and guessing and, grasping at stuff, asking everybody for advice and just trying to figure out what my next step was going to be. Because the one thing I was sure about was that research was not for me. I needed to leave academia. And that was the most important thing. So I did find a job not too long after I graduated. And at the time, it was the right decision. So found a job outside of academia. It fit all the criteria. There was no research. So that was good. And 5 years later, I was miserable. I had managed to trip my way accidentally without a lot of planning into a job that seemed right at the beginning, but turned out to be just a horrible fit. I was in a toxic culture, just miserable day in and day out, bored, and really just needed to find something else. And so that's when I dove into the job search process. I started looking for a new role, something that was a better fit, something that would be exciting and fun and make me feel alive, because this was just a terrible situation for me. And what really sucked about the process was that I was doing all the right things and still getting told no over and over again, right? Like I was doing the tailored resume and the networking and getting referrals, all the things that they tell you have to do if you want to be successful in convincing someone else to hire you. And yet I kept getting told no repeatedly. And it's disheartening. You get to this point where you're like, is this all that I'm ever going to do? Should I just find a way to deal with this and stick with it? Or do you just keep pushing through? Well, for me, staying there wasn't an option. So I kept at it. And I'm glad I did, because the breakthrough point for me was one conversation with one hiring manager who was turning me down for what at the time I thought was my dream job. And it's really amazing when these things happen, because at the time, these moments don't necessarily seem important. They're everyday occurrences. And, for me, I had been hearing no so many times that this was just another no. But for whatever reason, during this conversation, I asked the hiring manager what I could do better. I asked for feedback. And again, for whatever reason, she told me something that no one had ever told me before that I desperately needed to hear. And what she said was, it's not that you're not qualified. Jackie, you're super qualified for this job, but the problem is that you're not confident enough to do it. And in that moment, I felt like I had been sucker punched. It was painful. It's hard to hear that. But after I got over that initial reaction, I appreciated the value of that truth, that she had given me such a rare gift of a perspective change, because I hadn't understood why doing all the right things was not yielding me the outcome that it should have. And this aha moment of a lack of confidence was it was mind-blowing, right? I'd never expected that to be the problem, because I came from a world where everything was logical and, of course I'm qualified for these things. Why don't they see that? That's kind of what it felt like. And while it hurt to hear this, while it was a painful realization to have, it taught me a valuable lesson, because it made me realize the importance of mindset and belief in everything that you do. Because you see, like, it doesn't matter how impressive you seem on paper. It doesn't matter how extensive your credentials are, how much experience you have. None of that matters if your head trash is getting in the way. If your beliefs fundamentally don't support where you're heading, you're going to show up in a way that sabotages you. It may be subtle or it may be overt, but either way, you're going to get in your own way some way. So this conversation changed everything for me, because it basically set me down the personal growth path, which was something I'd never really paid attention to before. I fell down the personal growth rabbit hole and everything changed. So fast forward to today, and now I gave up on trying to be an employee. That was another revelation. But, going through all of this work, figuring out what was happening in my mind that was causing me to self-sabotage was huge, because once I figured it out and was able to get out of that toxic environment and had the space to actually figure out what the hell I was going to do, I started listening and I heard all of these other stories that were so similar to mine, all of these other struggles around me that were so similar to my own story. And I decided to do something about it. And so I became an entrepreneur because I wanted to help those who were where I was several years ago. And so that's what I do now. My mission is to empower PhDs and other high achievers to go after their dreams, to do the things that they feel inspired to do and make the meaningful impact that they want to make. And I believe that it all starts with confidence. So this is what confidence means to me. You might have your own definition, but for me, confidence is the willingness to do what needs to be done, even when you're afraid to do it. And it's about trusting that you'll be okay on the other side. It's not about being arrogant or having a false bravado or even faking it. It's simply about showing up as the best version of you in a way that is authentic to who you want to be in the world. And that's really all there is to it. Well, okay, so there's a little bit more to it, but that's the gist of it. There are a lot of components that go into building rock solid confidence, and it's broken down into your inner game and your outer game. So the inner game are the things that go on inside your head, that personal growth stuff, the vision that you have for your future, your purpose in life, your values, your skill set, and most importantly, your mindset or your beliefs. The outer game is everything else, right? Like the way that you're showing up in the world. So it's things like your strategy or your game plan, your environment, your habits, the specific actions that you take on a day-to-day basis, as well as your support system. So this is a lot, and we're definitely not going to talk about all of this. For the purposes of today, I want to focus on mindset. And the reason is that even if you have all the rest of this stuff dialed in, if your mindset's not right, none of the rest of it matters. I mean, that's exactly how I got stuck in that toxic job and had so much trouble getting out of it, because I was doing the things I was supposed to be doing, but at some level, my beliefs weren't aligned with that. On some level, I didn't believe I deserved the things that I wanted. I didn't believe I was good enough for the things that I wanted. And that had a very real effect on how I showed up in the world and how I showed up in interviews, how I talked about myself, how I described my experience and resumes, all of those things. And this same thing is true pretty much in every facet of your life. It's especially true as an entrepreneur. If you think about it, your mindset affects how your marketing comes out, how you talk about what you do, how you interact with clients, how you are on sales calls, all of these things. If your beliefs don't support it, it's going to affect how you show up, and it's going to affect your actions, often in a negative way. For a lot of us, that's not taking the right actions that we're supposed to be taking, or taking the actions, but you're kind of half-assing it a little bit. You're not all in, and that can also have negative consequences. So for today, we're going to talk about mindset as it relates to entrepreneurship. And a lot of the ways that this shows up is, like in the title, imposter syndrome, self-doubt. It also shows up as procrastination, overanalysis, fear of failure, rejection, and there's a whole host of other things. All of these things are related to mindset. And I think all of us have experienced some of this or all of this at one point or another, if not right now. I know, I personally struggle with procrastination to this day. This is something, I help people with this, and I still need help with it myself. And that's because we're human. This isn't something that we can fix. This is a process, and it's an ongoing thing. But the important thing is that it is something that you can work on. So rather than resign yourself to being a procrastinator or being someone who just is fearful or doubtful, understand that these are habits. These are mental habits. And because they're habits, they're not a fundamental part of your character, and therefore you can change them. The other thing I want to point out is that everything that's associated with these issues, it all comes down to fear, right? There's always some underlying fear, even if you're not overtly aware of it. There's something you're afraid of that is driving these behaviors. So I say this to just call it out, because there's nothing shameful about it. I think we carry a lot of guilt and shame around these things. And I want to say that this is normal. Like, this is a human reaction, but it doesn't have to be your defining characteristic. The other thing is that, this feels terrible, right? Like, we can probably all think of situations where we know we didn't show up in the way that we wanted to. Like, you look back on a situation, like, man, I could have totally done that better. why didn't I? And then you make excuses. And that doesn't feel good, right? It doesn't feel good in the moment. It doesn't feel good if you think about it afterwards, if you think about it at all, because we like to distract ourselves from things that make us uncomfortable. And what we really want is we want to feel like this, right? Like we want to feel like we are on top of the world and we can tackle any challenge, no matter what life throws at us. This is where we want to be. But the question is how? How do we do that? It starts with understanding a little bit about how your brain works. I'm not going to get super like detailed and nerdy about this, but I do want to give you a quick overview and a very simplified overview of the things that are going on under the hood when we're in a situation and we make a decision and we react a certain way. All of these things that are on the slide here, they happen in the blink of an eye, but they do happen. And most of us don't pay attention to that because we operate on autopilot. But it's important to be aware of these things because when you know that something's going on, you can actually do something different. And I'll get into that a bit more in just a minute. So here's what's going on in your brain when something happens. Like a situation occurs. So for example, I'm giving a talk right now, right? That's a situation that's occurring. Something is happening. A physical reaction will happen in your body in response to that situation. So in my case, when it comes to public speaking, my heart rate increases. I get a little fidgety, more so than I'm right now. And, you know, some people get sweaty palms. Some people, they get dry mouth. There are a whole host of things that happen. These are physical reactions that happen in your body. What happens next is your brain makes up a story to make sense of that physical reaction, because that's how our brains work. We want the world to make sense. And so we create stories all the time about everything to give meaning to the stuff that happens around us. So one story that could happen is I'm nervous. I could tell myself I'm nervous or I'm scared or I'm anxious about giving this talk. And that's a way for my brain to potentially explain all of the things that I'm feeling right now. And then based on that story, I might have an emotional reaction. Oh man, I'm so scared. What if they don't like me? What if I sound like an idiot? What if I forget how to do the full screen thing with the slideshow and then, oh my God, you think I'm, I don't know what the hell I'm talking about. All of these reactions could happen in response to that story I made up. And as a result, I could get flustered. I could stammer more than usual. I might flail, or who knows, people do all kinds of crazy things when they get nervous. And all of this happens in the blink of an eye. You've seen this with people in public speaking. They freak out, they freeze up, they look like a deer in headlights, or they stare at their notes and they don't look at the audience, all kinds of things. But here's the thing. So this physical reaction that happened in my body, I can't control that, right? You can't control your heart rate, your pulse, your blood pressure, none of that. It happens automatically. But what you can control is everything that happens afterwards. You can actually control the story you tell, the emotional reaction you have, and then what you choose to do. So for me, I could, instead of saying that I'm nervous and making that the story, I could say I'm excited. I'm so excited that Mike has given me the opportunity to nerd out about something that I absolutely love and get to share it with all of you. Like, that's a totally different story. My emotional reaction to that is like, this is so cool. I mean, you might not like it, but I'm having a good time up here. So cool. I hope we're all having a good time together, right? That's an emotional reaction. And the resulting actions are, I don't know if you just noticed that because I'm probably tiny in the screen, but like I stood up straighter, I pulled my shoulders back, and I'm speaking more animatedly versus I'm so nervous, I'm so scared, please don't hit me, please don't hit me, right? Like that's totally different. And it's all based on the story that I'm telling myself about what I'm feeling in the moment. That's it. So this is the sort of thing, I'm going to walk you through how to actually do this so that when you're in a situation that you are historically like not reacting to the way that you want to, you can choose to do something different going forward. So there's 4 main steps to this. And I want to go through them really quickly, and then I'll go into them more deeply in just a second. So the first step is awareness of your behavior. So you have to know what it is that you're doing that you're not happy about, as well as the underlying story that's going on there. The next step is to describe the situation in a very clinical, like objective manner. The third step is to reframe the story so that it's a story that you actually like and care about and want to have. And then the final step is to just choose a new action, because we want to assume that what goes on in our head is truth, like that if you think it, it must be true. But that's not the case. Like, just because your brain thinks something doesn't mean you have to act on it, doesn't mean you have to believe it. You can always make a different choice. And so these are tools that will help you do that in pretty much any situation. So the first step is awareness. And the reason this is important is because you cannot change something you don't know anything about. If you are unaware of something, you're just going to continue to operate on autopilot, and that's not good. So the first step is noticing that something is going on. But it's also important to go a little bit deeper, because you might recognize that there are certain situations where you know you're not showing up the way that you want to. And that's important. That's a good first step. But it's also important to recognize what story you're telling yourself that's fueling that behavior. So some questions you can ask yourself are things like, what specific behavior do you want to change? What triggers that behavior? Like, what situations or feelings trigger that behavior? When I say feelings, I mean like the physical sensations. And then what are you thinking when this happens? What are the stories that you're telling yourself? So, for example, I'm going to use an example from my own life about discovery calls, because that's something I'm actively working on. Historically, I have shied away from doing discovery calls at all. Like, I've been very hesitant to even get on calls with people. But then even when I did, I would feel nervous, like legit nervous, really jittery. I'd talk too fast. I'd get like dry mouth and coughing and, like the throat clearing, all that stuff. And what was going on in my head was a fear of rejection. Don't say no. Please don't say no. It wasn't even, I want them to say yes. It was, please don't say no, was what was going on in my head. And the resulting behavior that would happen is I would either not make an offer at all, or if I did make the offer, I would mess it up so badly, right? Like, I would rush through it. I would over-explain, and my body language would scream desperate and needy. And that is not a good look for anybody. And the end result is that there would be no sales and a very, very hefty amount of shame associated with it, because I knew I could do better. So this is what I mean by creating awareness. I'm sure all of you can think of at least one situation where you're like, dude, I could totally do this better. And I know I can do this better, but why can't I seem to do it better? I just get into this cycle of, freaking out, however it is that you freak out. Everybody's got something, I'm sure. So, and so I call this out, not to make you feel bad. I'm not asking you to relive it so that you feel shameful about it, but to recognize that it's a human reaction. It's completely normal, and there's something you can do about it. So once you're aware of this behavior, you're aware of something that you want to change, the next step is to describe the situation. And what I mean by that is, what's actually happening? Like, what's actually true about what's going on in the situation? Like, outside of any judgments, like just the facts. Because when you do this, when you take a step back from the emotional charge around the situation, it's a lot easier to see that it's really not that big of a deal, that you're making it a big, hairy deal. And by stepping back and going, what's actually happening here? What's true versus what am I making assumptions about? This gives you the distance to take a breath and then move on and go to the next step. But before we get there, let me explain what I mean by that. So for my discovery call example, what's true about the situation is that it's two people having a conversation about something. That's it. Really, like at its core. The discovery call, it's a conversation about their problem. I'm trying to determine whether or not I can help them with their problem. If I can help them with their problem, I can choose to share my solution or not, and invite them to work with me or not. And at the end of all of that, they will make their own decision. That's really it. It's two people having a conversation in which one person is going to make a decision at the end. And it doesn't have to be anything more or less than that. It's when we make it a big deal, when we attach an outcome to it, like we need that outcome to be a certain way. That's when we get into trouble. And so taking a moment to say, what's actually happening here, helps you distance yourself from that expectation and from that attachment. It diffuses the emotional charge. And so once you do that, once you can detach yourself a little bit from the emotional charge of it, then you reframe the story. You think about another way to look at the situation, a better way that you could tell the story, and how you want to feel ideally in this situation going forward. So for my discovery call, I can remind myself that I've helped plenty of people with this problem, right? So of course I can help this person. You know, if you've got that doubt, like, can I actually get them the result I'm promising? That's one thing to consider, right? Remind yourself, you've totally done this before. You know what you're talking about. You're just having a little bit of, squeamishness now, not a big deal. And the other thing is for me, it's been about reminding myself the goal of that conversation is to show them what's possible, offer a solution, and invite them to make a decision. That it's not about what their decision is. It's not the yes or no decision itself. It's just to help them get to a point to make a decision. That's how I choose to reframe how I look at a discovery call. And what that does is it puts me in a position where I'm thinking more about service versus what I want them to do. And it also means that I'm focusing on what is actually within my control, which is what I say, how I show up, all of that stuff, not on what they decide, because I can't control that. So reframing this story makes me feel excited to have the conversation. It makes me feel like I'm focused on what their needs are and how I can serve them, whether or not I can serve them, versus what's going on in my head. And that reframe makes all the difference. So when you think about your particular situation that you'd like to do something different, think about ways that you can reframe that story in a way that makes you feel better about it, because ultimately that's what will affect how you show up in that moment. And then the next step is simply to take action. Decide what it is that you're going to do instead. You can also think about why it's important to do this differently or to take the action in the first place. And the reason I say that is because a lot of times what we do is we talk ourselves out of doing the things that we know we should be doing. And so going from inaction to action is a big win all by itself. The other thing is to stop in this new moment and think about the story that you're telling yourself now. Like, how is the story different from the original one? So that you can remind yourself, the next time this situation occurs, and the next time, and the next time, how you feel now and how much better it feels than when you're doing it in a way that you didn't want to be doing it. So the other thing, so to go back to my discovery call situation, for me, it was about making the offer without feeling attached to the outcome. Like, that was ultimately what was really getting in my way, is I cared whether or not they said yes. I really wanted them to say yes, which was where my desperate, needy, please don't say no energy came from. And stepping back and realizing that it wasn't about whether or not they said yes, it was really important to help them make a decision. That changed everything. It changed the way I felt about it. And that from that point on, anytime we had a conversation and the person was able to make a decision, even if the decision was to not work with me, it was a win. It was a success, because face it, most of us don't make decisions. Like, most of us will avoid making tough decisions if we can get away with it. And so I consider it a big win if I can help someone come to a decision. And whatever their decision is, that's fine, because remember, I can't control that. And whenever you try to control something that's outside your control, it just creates stress and frustration. So yeah, that's pretty much all there is to it. I know this was a very simple framework, but just to recap real fast, like, these are the 4 steps. If you're in a situation where you aren't acting the way that you want to because of doubt, because of imposter syndrome, because you've got fear around something, going through these steps will help you come up with a different way to do it. It starts with becoming aware of the behavior in the first place and the underlying story that you're telling yourself in that moment. It's around describing the actual, like, just the facts, details of the situation, minus any emotional charge, minus any story that you're putting on it. Reframe the story in a way that's more empowering for you, and then choose to do something different. And some of the ways that you can implement this, so there's several ways you could do this. This is a great journaling exercise. Like, you could just sit down on your own and write through, what's going on your own. That's totally good. I like to use it as part of the reflection process after, like, say, right after discovery call, for example. I like to take some time and immediately, like, go through, okay, what went well, what didn't go so well, what would I do differently? You could use these sorts of prompts in that kind of a scenario as well. Another way that this works really good is to do this in combination with some sort of a support system, like a coach or a peer support person of some kind, because other people tend to be able to see our blind spots much better than we can. And just like that hiring manager who pointed out my big blind spot and my lack of confidence. It'll be easier for someone else to point out your blind spots, because, they'll see things from a perspective that you won't. And I think it's really important to have those people in your lives, those truth tellers who will lovingly call you out on your crap when you're making the same excuses over and over again, not showing up the way that you say you want to. Like, we just need those reminders. So that's another way that you can utilize these sorts of prompts in a way that will help you grow and refine your approach to things. And again, I want to recognize that, this is really simple sounding. It's not easy to do. I'm not going to pretend like this is an easy thing to do, because it's essentially forming a new habit and deliberately sidestepping an old one. We're talking about changing behaviors that you've probably been doing unconsciously for ages at this point. And that is no easy feat, but it can be done. And what I can tell you is that it gets easier with time. It gets easier with repetition. Eventually, you won't have to think about it anymore, and you'll have a completely different bad habit that you want to get rid of. And you'll also start noticing that you'll pay more attention to the old stories that pop up in the moment in a variety of situations. You'll start becoming more aware of those times when you hesitate, or those times when you didn't show up as your best. And you'll start noticing what you're thinking in the moment, which will help you make different decisions on the fly, versus this sort of thing, which is more of an after the fact reflection type of exercise. But regardless of what you choose to do with this, at the end of the day, here's the thing. At the end of the day, the only thing that is really standing between where you are and where you want to be is the story that you're telling yourself about why you think you can't have what you want. So if you want to change the outcome, all you really have to do is find a way to change the story. And that's all I got.
Yeah, that's really cool.
Thanks.
One question I have for you. Can we do a Q&A?
Please.
Yeah.
Yeah.
One question I have is, I think going towards behaviors that are less about control is such an interesting thing, and something that I've been working on for so long. Of worrying about things that I can't control is I'm probably an expert at that. No shame. I might not be an expert at much, but an expert at trying to control things that I can't control.
Mm-hmm.
Was there a moment where you realized that you were doing that? Was it in the PhD process? Was it after? Was it through entrepreneurship? When did you realize that you're my problem is sort of trying to change things that I'm never going to be able to change?
Yeah. That's an interesting question about when it happened. For starters, I want to acknowledge that is a totally understandable, the desire to control that which we can't control is totally normal. A lot of us do it. And it is the root of most of our frustrations in our lives. At the very core of things, most often the things that we get most frustrated with are things that we're trying to wrangle that aren't ours to control. But for me, I didn't have words for it until I was reading something by Ryan Holiday. It was one of the Stoic somethings. I forget which book it was of his, but it was something by him. And, it was a Marcus Aurelius quote or an Epictetus quote or something like that. And it basically just laid it out there that, at the end of the day, all we can control is what we think, what we believe, and how we show up. That's really it. Everything outside of that sphere is not ours to control. And the more we can learn to let go of it and focus on what we can control, the easier everything gets, because we're eliminating unnecessary strife. I think when I first realized how I was applying that, it was about entrepreneurship. It was when I recognized that I was so attached to people saying yes, and I would be devastated if they said no. I'd take that as a personal affront, oh my God, I'm a terrible person. I'm not meant to do this, blah, 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 all the crap, right? And it's just not true. It's just a story. And whether or not you choose to act on the story is the important thing, And so for me, learning to let go of that control I've seen it in other areas of my life too. Like in my personal life, I used to date this guy who was terrible about communicating. And we all know I'm a talker, like I'm a communicator. And he just wouldn't communicate the way that I needed a partner to communicate. And I would try to have these conversations with him and explain. He's like, yeah, I get it. And it'd be fine for a couple of days. And then it would go back to this radio silence or like, ghosting for periods of time or whatever. And I finally realized that what I was doing was driving myself crazy because I was trying to change his behavior. And that wasn't something I had any control over. You can, so you can manipulate people, right? Like I'm not advocating this, but you can manipulate people into doing what you think you want them to do, but it doesn't stick and it's really unethical. And it's not satisfying either because that's not who they are. So, learning to just accept like, oh, we're just not compatible for X, Y, and there are other things, but that was one of the big fundamental like mismatches is like, I need someone in my life who's very communicative. And if you are not, then that's cool. We don't belong together, as opposed to, why aren't you texting me? Why aren't you replying to my emails? I mean, see, it's everywhere. Like we try to do this all over the place, not just in entrepreneurship. But the first place I realized it was when I was freaking out about sales calls.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Does anyone else have any questions for Jackie regarding? And feel free to give examples too. She's really good at like helping you solve a specific problem that you're facing.
Hi, can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Well, I feel bad because I've been all over the place today doing things for my business, so I'm not at my place right now. I'm actually at a bank, so I missed a little bit of their talk, but from the big part that I did here, I have this issue, or well, I wouldn't call it an issue, but like this doubt whenever that I'm more like I'm on a meeting but talking to a person that is, because I'm pretty young and I'm talking to a person that is older than me, but he doesn't have a clue about what I do. So I feel judged, and I think I reflect that during that meeting too, because I also like start getting this comments about I don't know, just sweetie, or just like it's like kind of puts them in a position where they can easily just like I don't know how to explain it. I just feel like pressure, and then I lose like total confidence while I'm speaking. So how will you deal with this? How will you or like what would be those exercise, or what should be that story that I have to tell myself on moments like those?
So there's two things to consider in a situation like that. The first is whether or not this is true, the feeling of being judged. Are they actually treating you that way? Right? Because they may be like that. I'm not saying they are or they aren't. But it's determining whether or not someone is actually being judgmental or treating you in a way that you don't want to be treated, or if you've decided that they're going to treat you that way, therefore you become defensive preemptively, which causes them to respond to your defensiveness. Does that make sense?
It does.
Like,
yeah.
like determining which of those is actually happening is the first step. When it comes to thinking that you're going to be judged ahead of time before, if you've got no evidence to show that this is actually happening, I would ask like where that's coming from. Like what, if you're telling yourself this story and it's making you feel defensive, what else might be true? Like what's another story that you could say? This story, just because you think it doesn't make it the reality. And as you can see, like having that thought, having that story of I'm being judged for being younger, is causing you to act in a certain way that doesn't support a good outcome from that conversation. And so what's a different way that you could think about the conversation? You could think about the expertise that you're bringing, you know, how sure you are about what it is that you bring to the table and the value that you're bringing, like irrespective of any other conditions. Because, you know, unless someone, it's like giving someone the benefit of the doubt, like unless they actually do treat you poorly, in which case, you know, yeah, by all means, have whatever response you're going to have to that. If they haven't done anything, like if they're just, you know, having a normal interaction, give them the benefit of the doubt. Like, you know, I think it's better to assume that the person is coming from a place of a good intention versus that they're out to get you, unless they give you evidence to the contrary.
Yes.
But when you make the decision beforehand that, oh, they're going to judge me, they're going to think this about me, and then you have a demeanor that comes across as defensive or have your guards up, they're going to respond to that because that's what you're putting out there, versus if you just are open and sharing your knowledge and being brilliant and, you know, doing your thing, they're going to have a different reaction to that. Does that make sense?
It does make sense. I think because it did happen, like during the first months, and when I was having these meetings with older people, actually pensions, like people that has their pension and that wanted to obtain a visa for their pension, that actually happened about questioning like my knowledge, because of course we're like it's me talking to a person that is 75, 80, or like way older, so they're like, you just look too young, or like those type of questions, or like, do you actually know what you're doing? So that happened. And I think what's going on now is that I am defensive with others that fit that same profile,
Mhm.
older, or just American in general. But yes, I think it can also be that, and that I present myself and I'm just like in a defensive position.
Yeah. What you can do is notice how you start to feel whenever you get defensive. Like when you start to get defensive, you'll feel a certain way, right? You'll probably tense up a little bit, or there's something that happens in your body. And
Mhm.
make note of that so that the next time you're in that situation, you'll notice when you start to tense up or do whatever your defensive reaction is, and then choose to act differently, right? Go, oh, this is just me being defensive, but I don't need to be, you know, and tell yourself that new story, the more empowering story, the one that makes you feel good and makes you feel like you want to feel in that moment. So that, you know, when you catch yourself starting to get defensive, you can take a step back and be like, oh, wait, let me do this instead. I decided ahead of time, I'm going to do this instead, and then do that. It's going to feel awkward. Like the first, you know, don't expect this to be like an overnight thing because it does take time. So you can start small. Start by noticing what your body does. Like, so that when it happens, you're like, oh, I just did that. Even if everything else is the same the first couple of times. And then after you're like, oh, I can regularly notice when I start to get defensive, then start doing the action change, you know, tell yourself the new story. Be like, no, this is the benefit of having this conversation. This is why I should show up as my best self, and then act differently. Like, do it in steps if you need to. Don't expect it to be an overnight thing, because our habits, they are dug in deep and they take a long time to undo. So, you know, take baby steps, but take steps, you know, and I think that'll help over time to start doing it, chipping away at it one piece at a time.
That does make sense. That's a great advice. So thank you very much.
You're welcome.
I think one thing I've struggled with is the idea of, like, I think you were talking about, is like the worst thing they could do is say no. And I think in my head, it was like, no, the worst thing that can happen is if they say no and they think I'm stupid. Like, and then that snowball starts, is like, yeah, they could say no. And then, but the only reason that they'd say no is because of me. And then that's the issue. Is so, and I think it's a lot of, and I think you and I have talked about this before, that there's this idea of, especially with entrepreneurs, is we're selling ourselves. So if you say no, you're like, it's so much easier to sell someone else's thing or a theory or someone else's idea, because then I'm not a good salesperson. But if they say no to you selling yourself, the only person, like, there's so much of that you actually control there.
Mhm.
There's a lot of shame that comes with that if you're not selling yourself the way that you want.
Right. So, a couple things. When you say, you know, when you tell yourself they said no because they don't like me or they think I'm an idiot, is that true? Do you know that that's true? Right? That's the first thing to ask yourself. And the answer is probably you don't know.
Right.
But even if it is, you can't control that. Right? Like that's not something you can control. You have no control over what someone else thinks about you or what they decide. But what you can do is ask yourself, did I show up in the best way that I could? Did I actually do my best? Because if you put yourself out there and, you know, you're present and you're conveying whatever it is that you're offering in the best possible light, clearly, and you love it, that's the other thing, right? That's part of the belief, right? Like if you don't love your offer, that'll come across as well in really subtle nonverbal ways. But you know, if you put yourself out there and you put your offer out there in the best possible light, and you did everything you could within your control to set yourself up for a successful encounter, and they still chose to say no, that's on them. You did everything you could do because everything else that could have happened was outside your control. And coming to a point where you can accept that, I think, is a really powerful realization, because it divorces you from that shame around people saying no. It's also not your fault, like that you have such a visceral reaction to someone turning you down. We all do, right? This is something that is hardwired into our brains evolutionarily, because way back in the before times, you know, before modern civilization, if you were ostracized from your community, it was a death sentence. You know, you beaten by a tiger or something, and you needed your communities to survive. Therefore, rejection had a very real penalty to our ancestors. That doesn't really apply anymore, but our brains are dumb and doesn't know that, right? So that's why rejection hurts so badly. It doesn't matter what kind of rejection it is. But that's why we have such a strong response to it. So it makes sense that we have these thoughts, because our brains are just trying to keep us safe. Like, our brain doesn't mean to be a jerk. It's just, its job is to keep the meat fresh. And it's just doing what it can to keep you alive. And it's like, well, your current state keeps you alive. This unknown might be dangerous. I don't know what's out there. It's doing what it's supposed to be doing, but that doesn't mean it's right. You know, so yeah, those painful, like, rejections still hurt. I'm not saying it doesn't hurt when a prospect is like, nah, I'm gonna pass. Like, even if you did everything you could and they were still like a no, it's still gonna sting, but it's not a commentary on your worth as a human being. And that's what we make it when we take it, you know, we make it mean that when we take it personally. And it doesn't mean that inherently. We choose to make it that big of a deal, or we can choose not to, but we always have a choice.
Yeah.
Make sense?
Yeah. Yeah.
I know it's easy to say, it's hard to do. I'm not saying like this shit's really hard to do. Sorry, pardon the language, but but the important thing is to do it, right? It's to be aware of it, because most of us operate on autopilot, and that's how we end up in these loops where, like, but I'm doing the right stuff. Why isn't it working? I'm having the sales call. I'm following the script. Why are they saying no? That's because your beliefs aren't supporting what you're saying, or you're attached to the outcome, or there's something going on under the hood. But once you know that, you can choose to do something about it. It does take time, though. It's not easy, but it's simple.
Yeah.
I just want to say that I really liked your comments. The brain's job is to keep the meat fresh. I think is that what you said?
Yeah.
I've never heard that. It's awesome.
Oh, I heard somebody say that once, and it stuck. Yeah, sorry. I was a neuroscientist in a previous life, so I like brain stuff. Yeah, so that's where that came from. But yeah, all of the fear responses we have are really an effort to keep us alive. And you know, so that's really where that comes from ultimately.
Yeah. Very cool.
That was a really good talk. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. Well, does anyone have well, thank you for everyone for being here. Does anyone have any last minute questions for Jackie about how to maybe even just improve your pitch more confidently or approach your entrepreneurship journey more confidently? Guess this is a talk on confidence, so asking people to speak isn't necessarily like we got but no, Jackie, this was really enlightening. I agree that the keep the meat fresh is, I think that might stick with me. And the idea that new things are scary just because our brains are trying to keep us safe. So, and reframing that as excitement is really cool. I think reframing fear as excitement. I used to be a cheerleader for the University of Michigan, and we had to do backflips. I had never done a backflip before, and it terrified me. It's the most, speaking of brains and evolution, it's the most unnatural thing you could like. What are you going to do? Do a backflip and kill a zebra? Like, come on. Like, there's no reason to do it. And that's what they told us was there's no way to avoid the fear, but you have to turn fear into excitement and say, you are excited to do a backflip in front of 100,000 people. And because your brain is never going to allow you to do it if you're afraid.
Yep.
But your physical reaction is always going to be trying to keep you safe. So the only thing you can do is turn it into potential energy and a flip. It works until you fall on your head, and then you have to redo that whole process until
That's fair.
yeah. So
Yeah, stories are everything, and we are storytelling machines.
yeah. Very cool.